This is your Day X World War III update. Here we go again. The panic is recommencing in those too blinkered to understand that the global power struggle transcends plebeian politics. Months ago, I warned you that the decision to remove restrictions on the use of ATACMS, Storm Shadow, Scalp missiles, and anything that falls underneath that in terms of technological sophistication had been green-lit by the Biden administration. It just wasn't official yet. We knew that because Sergei Lavrov, one of the most venerated diplomats in the world, with the exception of the West, of course, who are Russophobic, told us, the Russian foreign minister told us that the decision to wage war against Russia, NATO waging war by proxy by Ukraine, had been made when the decision to remove restrictions on using deep strikes to strategically and militarily defeat the Russians was made. But it was not made official at that time. The reason? There are probably many reasons. But now we know that, in fact, according to an anonymous official, as reported by the New York Times and the Associated Press, there have been restrictions now removed by Ukraine. Zelensky has weighed in. Putin has weighed in. Biden has weighed in the sense that he declined to comment, thus tacitly admitting that this is in fact the case. And we're going to talk about all the details of this today. But what people need to understand, and you can take this for what it's worth, to the umbrage of all my critics over the past couple months who've been so impatient because they have such a blinkered perspective and they're panic preppers, okay? If something is not happening right now, then there's no reason to prepare. You buy low and you sell high. You don't buy high. That's what a panic prepper does. They buy at the top and then they sell at the bottom. In those periods of relative calm, that's when you want to prep. But I've been persistent with this because I've known that the global chessboard doesn't change just because they put in an ostentatious populist in the driver's seat with his coterie of so-called constitutionalists who are going to completely revise the system. The global chessboard doesn't change. The pieces are still where they were. It's just a matter of where they're going to wage war next. There is no anti-war party. And the sooner people realize that, the better. Okay? Because there's a lot of incredulous people who are about to get duped once again, saying things like, the Republicans aren't the party of war and the Democrats are the party of war. War transcends plebeian politics, man. When are people going to understand? Do you remember George Bush in the Iraq and Afghanistan war? There's countless examples. Both parties are, when it comes to American interests are preserving the US dollar as the global reserve currency. And if that means waging war with Russia or Iran or China, they'll do it whether they're Democrat and Republican. So can we please cut the political bullshit and just keep prepping for shit to hit the fan, okay? Because that's where we're heading. Here's what's going on with this situation. Biden has lifted a ban on Ukraine to use U.S. weapons to strike deep into Russia. Now, this is according to an anonymous official that was providing this information to the New York Times. Again, we have no reason to disbelieve this because there's many reasons as to why this, of course, would be enacted now. For starters, it's a great way to sabotage the Trump administration in an attempt to present them with an intractable situation once they enter office on January 20th and make it more difficult for them to bring the Russian-Ukraine war to a halt. Because make no mistake about what this means. This means that American soldiers who are assisting Ukraine with the utilization of these ATACMS weapon systems, as well as French and UK soldiers, are now going to be directly engaged, directly complicit in the targeting, in the military defeat. That is now the goal. It's not the economic defeat. It's not to defeat Russia strategically by, wrapping them with sanctions and ensnaring them in this proxy conflict. Then now the objective is clear that NATO is going to provide the ISR, the weapon systems, and the guys that can help direct those weapon systems to militarily defeat the Russians. That is World War III. This is why Putin revised the nuclear doctrine months ago and established those red lines, which I should say have already been violated on numerous occasions. We don't even talk about the drone swarms that are heading towards Moscow on a weekly basis that are in the dozens. It's just commonplace now. It's seen as just de facto a background consequence of this proxy conflict. But those are all escalatory things. They're new plateaus of escalation and normalization. So this is very serious, and I know a lot of people think that this is an attempt to sabotage Trump, but Trump's own national security advisor, Mike Waltz, has explicitly stated, and I will read you the exact quote, that he is all for this. So there is bipartisan support for going to war with Russia as much as there is war with Iran, albeit the war with Iran seems to have more bipartisan support. What are the reasons for this now outside the realm of just trying to undermine Trump's administration? It could have a lot to do with the recent attack on the Ukrainian power grid, which was one of the biggest attacks to date. So they have now announced nationwide power restrictions inside Ukraine after the most previous Russian attack that happened, I believe it was just today that it happened, wiped out a significant portion of Ukraine's power grid. This, of course, very significant moving into winter. There's been a lot of other decoupling that has happened. Russia is no longer shipping gas to Austria. Russia is no longer shipping nuclear uranium, that is special uranium for U.S. nuclear power plants. That's done. The transiting of Russian gas through Ukraine, that's done this year. So anyone who thinks that this is slowing down, you're delusional, man. And I'm really concerned. I'm genuinely concerned that this halo effect with Trump, people thinking that, I almost think that it is a psyop in a way, that they put him there so that he could placate the masses just a little bit longer because they know what's coming, and get people to think that everything's fine now because Trump's arrived. The complete opposite is true. Not only is his national security advisor on board, even if he wasn't, the Democrats, or the ones who are the globalists, the neocons, whatever you want to call them, that subsect of the Democrats, will continue to try to sabotage any sort of peace effort throughout the next 4 years. So either way, it's, and the Republicans, a lot of them support Ukraine. So, I mean, the idea, if anything, the best thing we can hope for is some temporary détente in hostilities. That's it. Some freezing of the conflict, and not really a freezing, but just keeping it at a certain level. And on the one hand, the silver lining with this deep strikes into Russian territory is that it appears as though, because it happened after this attack on Ukraine's power grid, it seems every time Ukraine gets punched and gets kicked and is about to be knocked out, the West steps in and ups the ante a little bit, just to keep the right amount of countervailing force to prevent Ukraine from doing too much damage to Russia, that it might start a nuclear war, but also prevent Ukraine from losing. So now this is, in theory, going to allow Ukraine to act with impunity inside Russia using NATO weapons. Because really, this is not about however many dozens of ATACMS or Storm Shadow or Scalp missiles they have left in their arsenal. According to a lot of reports, there isn't much. What this is about is allowing Ukraine to use its homegrown systems with NATO ISR. That's what this is about. because they are now building their own ballistic missile system, their own ballistic missiles. All their money, resource, funding, intelligence comes from NATO countries, so you can't say they own anything. They're not an independent nation anymore. And so that's what's more important here, is that they're going to be utilizing their own drones that Lloyd Austin himself admitted were even more, had more capabilities in some respects in terms of their range, especially, than these cruise missile systems that they're wanting approval of. All this is a sign really of solidarity with NATO and Ukraine. And now it's happening at a time when they're really on the back foot. So it's just a matter of counterbalancing the Russian advance at this point. That's the silver lining. The other reasons given is the North Korean participation in the conflict, which is being cited as one of the reasons why NATO now has to do something. But I think primarily the timing of this and the justification will be the attack on Ukraine's power grid. Because if that power grid goes down and stays down throughout winter, Ukraine is in big trouble. We're going to see humanitarian crises, possibly the likes of which we haven't seen since the war began. The other thing that happened this week that people forget is that Ukraine expressed tangentially its nuclear ambitions. I believe it was a report prepared for by a Ukraine minister or by some organization, some Ukrainian organization, that indicated, and this was reported by the Institute for the Study of War, so this is being parroted by, American hawks, that Ukraine could create a nuclear bomb within a short period of time, that they have the expertise and they have the spent plutonium or uranium or whatever it is they need to make it, if they wanted to, almost as if to threaten the United States, saying, you better give us what we want or we're going to do something crazy. Understand, and I always say this, and the Russophiles always forget, Ukraine has immense amounts of leverage. Watch my video where I talk about the 16 reasons Trump will not be able to end the Ukraine war. Not in a day, not in a few weeks, not in months, not in years, possibly decades if we're so lucky. It's not going to happen. Ukraine has so much leverage in this conflict. You seriously think that they've put all of this money into this conflict just to see it end? It's not going to happen, unfortunately. Okay? Biden's decision to authorize Ukraine to use long-range U.S.-made missiles marks an escalation in the war with Russia. These missiles, capable of striking up to 190 miles, will allow Ukraine to target key Russian infrastructure and supply lines. Beyond that, though, this 190-mile thing is kind of irrelevant because, again, there are not only can Ukraine drones go up to like 1,600 miles, but the storm shadows that they have are rumored to have ranges northward of potentially 500 miles. These old stock storm shadows that are engineered for longer ranges. Okay, all this coming online at the same time that Poland just had their Aegis system, their nuclear missile defense base come online. Very concerning stuff. Again, France and the UK have also greenlit deep strikes into Russian territory, which is just insane. Remember, every single escalation has been preceded by months, if not years, of controversy. Oh, should we send Stingers or Javelin missiles? I don't know. We're going to argue about it for a couple of years, and all of a sudden they're there. Same thing with the German tanks. Everybody thought that was a massive. I thought that was I thought that was it. I thought when we seen German tanks engaging Russians that we were just, a hop, skip, and a jump away from the nukes flying. I was wrong. I thought that the Patriot weapon system, everybody thought that was a massive escalation. It was debated for a long period of time. The F-16s were debated for nearly 2 years, at least, openly after the war started, before they made their way there. And they're still en route, okay? So they're still entering the fray. We don't know what kind of impact they've been having. I'm sure they've been having some impact. Let's not remember, Ukraine is currently inside Russia. There are NATO mercenaries still fighting inside Kursk and they've not been able to push them out yet. At the same time, they've greenlit deep strikes using NATO weapons. So all of these things, ATACMS, F-16s, HIMARS, they always debate it beforehand. So the fact that they're now talking about nuclear weapons in the hypothetical means that there's probably already plans to have that in play at some point in time. Here's Mike Waltz, exact quote, Trump's future national security advisor. He is in favor of lifting restrictions on the use of Western long-range missiles to attack Russia. Waltz also noted that Washington should increase its military support for Kiev regime if the Russian authorities refuse to hold talks on Ukrainian settlement on U.S. terms. Earlier, Waltz criticized the outgoing U.S. President Joe Biden for modest efforts to close loopholes that allow Russia to export its oil and gas to international markets. According to Politico, Waltz's appointment to the new administration signals Washington's readiness to step up measures against Russian energy resources. Now, Zelensky seems to be happy about this. Today, he said, many in the media are talking about the fact that we have received permission to strike the Russian Federation. And here's what he had to say. But blows are not inflicted with words. Such things are not announced. The rockets will speak for themselves. And this is another thing to keep in mind, is that typically when they make these announcements, the shit's already in play, okay? So that means that this has already been happening. It's very likely it's already been happening, which is why Lavrov indicated, honestly, if Lavrov says something, just pretty much take it to the bank at this point. This is not a guy who speaks in sensational, alarmist terms. When he says something, everything that he said up until this point, you gotta believe it. It's not like he's talking up Russian capabilities. He's not minimizing what Russia's doing. But when he makes statements with respect to U.S. foreign policy, you better believe it. And the other thing that he stated is that there is no signs that there's going to be any change in the policies when Trump enters into office. So this brief period of seeming détente and hostilities, people should enjoy it because it's probably not going to last that long. And if Trump is engaged in words with Vladimir Putin, we could actually see a faster escalation. Because it's one thing for tough talk when you don't actually have to be in a fight. But if Putin says no to Trump, then who knows? Who knows what could happen at that point in time? Either way, whether it's Biden, Trump, Kamala, it doesn't matter. The end result is going to be the same because there's a conflict of interests. There's a power struggle globally. A second U.S. official said that Biden's approval of ATACMS is going to have a very specific and limited effect on the battlefield, and this comment was designed to limit concerns about escalation. Again, it's mission creep, right? So Biden would not do this now if it wasn't going to ensure that the Trump administration was forced to continue with the policy in some respect. Putin has responded, not today, but this is the general policy of the Russian administration. We will use nuclear weapons if an enemy missile or UAV is launched towards Russia, or when these weapons cross into Russian territory. That was the official statement that he made 2 months ago. President Putin warned in September that the expansion of strikes deep inside Russia using Western weapons would significantly change the nature of the conflict. He argued that such strikes would be impossible without the participation of foreign personnel and that it would mean NATO countries are directly involved in the conflict with Russia. Under certain conditions, a massive launch of enemy air power, including airplanes, missiles, or UAVs, resulting in a violation of our border, may be a justification for the use of nuclear weapons. That happens every week with Ukraine UAVs. Freudian slip there. Aggression against Russia by a non-nuclear state but with the support or participation of a nuclear-armed country, will be considered a joint attack. So these are the conditions of the new nuclear doctrine. Equivalent nuclear protection will be established for Belarus. Now, Donald Tusk, the president of Poland, has said no one will stop Putin with phone calls. The attack last night, referring to the attack by Russia on Ukraine's power grid, is one of the biggest in this war, and has proven that the telephone diplomacy, I'm presuming he's alluding to the call that allegedly happened with Trump and Putin, which, according to other sources, claims that that call never happened, has proved that the telephone diplomacy cannot replace real support from the whole West for Ukraine. The next weeks will be decisive, not only for the war itself, but also for our future. They're saying that they're going to ratchet things up in the run-up to Inauguration Day. Donald Trump Jr. has said the following on Twitter. The military-industrial complex seem to want to make sure they get World War III going before my father has a chance to create peace and save lives. Listen, there is nobody more ensnared in the military-industrial complex than Trump's coterie of Zionist supporters in his cabinet. They are all hardline hawks, and they're all going to continue the military-industrial complex interests in one form or another. So this idea that Donald Trump Jr. is speaking out against the power, speaking out against the MIC is just, it's absurd. Maybe in one respect, he's going to try to assuage his constituents, and because, of course, Trump's the anti-war president, right? No, Trump is the America First president. And America First, unfortunately, when you are a global superpower that has its financial integrity dependent on projecting military power around the world, there's no escaping it. We're in it to win it. We're in it to the end. Yeah, and he's calling people imbeciles. And, you know, granted, this absolutely is an attempt by the Biden administration to put Trump in an implacable situation. There's no doubt about that. But this is another thing. And all I'll say politically is you have guys like Matt Gaetz, Vivek, Elon, and Trump, all these guys making all these threats to wage lawfare, which they've had it waged against them. There's no doubt about that. But to do it in reverse, and they're going to do all these cuts, and government employees are going to get cut, and the bureaucracy is going to be running scared. We're going to drain the swamp, yada, yada, yada. Why the hell would you be so vocal about this in the run-up to Inauguration Day? You give every incentive for your adversaries then to sabotage any sort of peace talks or to do whatever they can to try to create a major war, possibly, and I don't want to go Alex Jones on you guys because this is what, I could already hear. I know Alex Jones is saying this today. I could just, I'll bet anybody that he's saying this. They're going to try to start a war so that, Biden can claim continuity of government, make sure. I can't do this because my throat, sorry, I can't do the Alex impression today, but so Biden can maintain power and, cancel Inauguration Day and impose martial law, blah, 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 blah. That's what he's going to say. And, honestly, at this point, anything's possible. I think that would start a civil war if they tried to do that. The only way that happens is if we see nukes fly before January 20th. That is the only way people are going to acquiesce to martial law imposed by Joe Biden is if nuclear bombs are falling. And even then, the U.S. falls into disarray and unrest. I don't know if that happens on state lines, regional lines, or what, but it would be absolute chaos, okay? Kim Jong-un has told his military to get ready for war. It must be Sunday night. Blaming the U.S. and South Korea for pushing tensions on the Korean Peninsula to the worst phase in history, speaking at a meeting of military commanders in Pyongyang, Kim accused Washington and its allies of threatening North Korea with military confrontations. He urged his forces to to step up the readiness of the situation as it becomes more dangerous. And Iran's foreign minister, so this is not like just some pundit, some university professor, some think tank saying this. This is serious. Iran could expand its nuclear program if the International Atomic Energy Agency passes a resolution critical of the country. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi warned on Saturday they would not say this if they didn't already probably have a nuke already. This rumor that's been circulating, for which there is no evidence whatsoever, that Israel destroyed a nuclear weapons facility. There's no proof of that, number one, but the only way they could do this is with bunker busters of the nuclear sort, because any nuclear research of that sort would be done underground. So they haven't provided any satellite data, so this is all just nonsense. It's very likely that the Iranian foreign minister, in fact, went to Syria and Lebanon recently, signaling that they're getting ready for something big. And I believe it was, I'm not sure what his actual designation was, but there was a Iranian military official recently who accidentally let it slip that they do, in fact, have S-400 systems in their possession, as well as S-300 that everybody knows, but S-400 as well, which means that this could be part of the reason why Israel's recent attack against Iran was so fruitless. So, yeah. In an interview broadcast on Iranian state TV, he said Tehran was willing to cooperate with the UN atomic watchdog and resolve doubts about its nuclear program, but only, did I say pogrom? That was probably a Freudian slip as well, nuclear pogrom. But only if the agency abstained from political pressuring, which, of course, the IAEA tries to remain apolitical, but they're definitely an appendage of the Nato industrial complex. Guys, keep prepping. Remember, you don't buy at the top, you buy at the bottom. It's when things are calm, when you know that all of the variables in the equation are pointing towards catastrophe, even if people are in this Bitcoin bliss about the situation because Trump is now on the scene. Even if that is the case, you need to take stock of the fundamentals. That's how we should look at this. Look at the geopolitical fundamentals when making your investment decisions. And all of the fundamentals remain fundamentally unchanged. And I'm not going to go into all the details about that, but whether Trump or Biden or Kamala or whoever else is in office, that's not going to change. So all of the false promises, and it was so depressing. It was so depressing watching Iron Mike struggle the other night. And I have to say that I think some people say he threw the fight, but it looked more like that he was ill. It looked like whatever illnesses that he had in the past few months, it wasn't so much age, because in that first round, he was coming hard, but it looked more like he had some kind of sickness. He had the knee, and then he had that ulcer removed recently. But what's so sad about that is that this is something that captivated the entirety of the Western Hemisphere, the world for that matter. Talk about bread and circuses, something of, zero substance when you think about it. Jake Paul, a mediocre boxer, he fought one boxer, Tommy Fury, and he got his ass kicked. Maybe not got his ass kicked, but he got beat. But, this is what we've exchanged real competitive sports for. Then you have the John Jones fight with Stipe Miocic, who was, I don't think the numbers even came close to what they did on Netflix. So it just shows you that we're so concerned with fake and the frivolous circus as opposed to what's real. And this whole Trump thing is, I think it's just a big smokescreen, honestly, to try to keep people in control while this whole thing collapses, to be brutally honest. Give the people, somebody they can believe in while the ship sinks. That's pretty much it. And he will be the war president, as I've indicated. So keep on prepping, my friends. Look at the fundamentals. Have the fundamentals changed? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Still 36 trillion in debt. The weather is still wacky. We are still caught in wars which are not going to be resolved with any sort of bellicose rhetoric. They're going to be resolved on the battlefield the way all wars are. Wars are only resolved when somebody wins. Even the Cold War, we won the Cold War because the Soviet Union fell apart. Somebody or some country has to fall into civil unrest, whether it's Russia or Iran or China or the United States or Europe. Somebody's got to lose. And until that happens, we're always going to be walking on thin ice with this thing. So pay attention to the fundamentals. Don't be a panic prepper. Now I'm going to get, the channel views are going to start going up because everybody's going to start freaking out. We're not changing our tune. We've been very consistent with what we thought, and we're just going to continue to watch that unfold, and we're going to continue to buy the dip, buy the preparedness dip. And what I mean by that is, when the people aren't panicking, that is the time to go and stock up on stuff. That's the time to go and gear up. When the price of gold starts to drop, that's the time to buy, not at the top. You don't want to rush out there to Costco and buy gold at $3,000 a bar. No, you want to do it, hope that the price of gold goes down, the price of silver goes down so you can capitalize. Okay? So this Black Friday, gear up. Gear up, gear up, gear up, because we're talking about global decoupling here. We're talking about tariffs. All that shit that is going to be liquidated this year that is made in China may not be here next year. There is a distinct possibility that if it is here yet next year, it's going to be way more expensive. So, carpe diem. Thanks.